welcome.
Thank you very much. So who am I? I work at Fuel as a backend dev, and this presentation is inspired directly from one of the projects I had built. I had to support Chinese in it. So I'm one of you, a part of the community. I'm a C Python contributor, and I've contributed to many open source projects, including many of the Mozilla's project. I've been a GSOC 2018 mentor for Debian and an RGSOC 2016 mentor. Today we'll learn about the road to become a multilingual superhero in Django. So imagine you've got this awesome app served by RESTful API through Django and DRF, and suddenly a requirement comes in that we want this app and the admin panel in Chinese, or we want it in German. And if you have got this humongous code base, not written well with all the internationalization and localization stuff in mind, then boy, you're in danger. And you should better start praying to the Almighty to give you the strength and endurance on your path to become a multilingual superhero. So the first and foremost thing to enable translation is to tell Django what is the list of languages it should support, where does it find the translation for static data, what is the default language it should fall back on, in the case that there is no translation available for the requested language. So settings part. You need to have the LocaleMiddleware defined in the middleware classes. The sequence of middleware is important here. We'll see how it plays a role in the next slide. In the languages part, you define all the languages you want to support. And so in this example, I'm supporting English, simplified Chinese, as well as traditional Chinese. You also make two booleans true, which is use I18N and use L10N true. So what does I18N does is, like, it would load all the internationalization machinery, and the L10N one will format the dates, numbers, and calendars according to whatever locale the client has requested in. Apart from that, you define the language code. This is a very important bit of information here because this is the ultimate fallback in the request response cycle. So you also define the locale paths. So locale is a directory where all the PO files are placed. The PO files contain the static data translations. So before moving on, we'll see how do you retrieve language preference from the client's request. Now we need to decide how to track the language the client wants to communicate in. There are different ways to get the language preference in an HTTP request. In order to retrieve the language preference, the locale middleware tries to determine the user's language preference by the following algorithm. So first it looks for the language prefix in the requested URL. This is only performed when you're using the I18N patterns function in your root URL conf. Failing that, it would look for the language session key in the current user session. Failing that, it would look for a cookie. The name of the cookie used is set by the language cookie name setting. The default name for this key is Django_language. So failing that, it looks for the accept language HTTP header. This header is sent by your browser and tells the server which language or languages you prefer in order of priority. So Django tries each language in the header until it finds the one with the available translations. So for the REST APIs specifically, I have found the accept language header a much cleaner way to accomplish the task. And for enabling the multiple languages in admin panel, we'll prefer a utility functions, which is in the Django utils translation package, and it will modify your root URL conf as shown here. So you say format all my admin panel URLs with the language code. So as soon as you do that in your settings, it becomes this. So the I18N patterns will automatically prepend the current active language code to all the URL patterns defined within this particular function. So all your admin URLs with the current configuration having the ZHCN and EN activated will have these URLs. The star here in both of these cases is kind of a regular expression which is indicating that anything can happen after the admin. So for whatever language you want the admin panel to be accessible, the use of corresponding code in the URL can help you in accessing that. Then there is another setting which is prefix underscore default underscore language. When you set it to false, the default language code will not be prepended. So we have EN in this case. So if you set it to false, the default path would again become /admin rather than becoming /en/admin. So although you can do this to all the URLs, but for the API endpoints, we prefer to supply this particular bit of information in the accept language header, which is specifically to the HTTP requests, and which seems a more cleaner approach for the API endpoints. So during this talk, I'll talk about the gotchas moments where I tend to learn something new, where I was literally pulling out my hair, like what happened, why aren't the things working the way they should. So the locale middleware should always come before the common middleware and after the session middleware. This is because we earlier discussed that the session defines the cookie in the HTTP request, right? So if it isn't there, then the locale middleware cannot process your request and know what kind of the locale is being requested by the client. So yes, let's see what does locale middleware help with exactly. It's a secret sauce in the translation machinery. Let's have a look at the Django request response cycle here. So if you see here, it does the following. For the request part, it passes it and decide what translation object to install in the current thread context. For the response part, it does two things. First of all, it sets the content language header in the response for the client to know what language is used in the response for parsing. And if you have used the I18N patterns utility functions in your URL conf, then it would format the URL with the appropriate activated language. So the client can know what exactly the language was. Like whatever response you throw, the client should be able to know which language the response is in. So the question is what to translate. Majorly, we need two kinds of data. Static data that includes the model names, field name of models, error messages, that are particularly static in the application. Then there is dynamic data, which particularly mostly include the field values in the models that is input by the user. So for the static strings, we use static strings in our model names, field names, error messages, and we use them in many places, including Django templates, all our code files, including the models.py. And let's see how the translation looks like in all those places. Let's first discuss about templates. Anything that should be translated in template should be marked under the trans or the block trans tag. To make the translation work, there's one more thing to take care of, and that is loading the internationalization library tag at the top of every file that uses the trans or block trans tag. Let's quickly look at an example. So I have this dummy sign up page which demonstrates a header. It has two labels. One is username and another one is password. So right now, if I say that this particular template should be served to me in Chinese, I don't really get the Chinese version. All I get is the English version. So what I need to do here is to enable translation and serve the sign up page with the static content. We'll first load the translation tag like this, and then use the trans tag here to mark the content for translation. So all we are saying here is like convert this particular static string, convert this particular static string, and convert this particular static string. If you have like multiple lines to be translated, you can use the trans block tag. Gotcha number 2. The I18 tag should be loaded in every file, even if it extends another file that already has it loaded. So this can happen that you think, okay, you marked everything for translation, and then you're inheriting from another template, and you'll be sitting there snatching away your hair, like what's happening, and you can't figure it out. So use this tag everywhere in every template file, no matter if it is being extended. So let's talk about all the py files. By the py files, I mean the models.py file. So let's quickly look at an example. So we generally use the verbose name property. So we have the static string defined, like first name, last name, email address. And one thing you'll see here is like it uses a particular function known as ugettext lazy from django.utils.translation package. So there are various functions that this particular package provides. There's getText, there is ugettext, there is getText lazy, and then there is ugettext lazy. Basically, the U represents here the Unicode characters. So all over the code base, generally you'll use the ugettext lazy or the ugettext version. We'll see how that works. But right now, we just mark them for translation, just like we did it in templates, we'll do it here. So both the ugettext and ugettext lazy are the Python objects that are evaluated to string at different time. So the string representation depends on whatever language is activated in your HTTP request. To quickly test, you have this activate function, which activates a particular locale in your Django environment. And then you have this get language utility functions, which tells you which particular language is activated right now in the current context thread. So we'll say, like, I want to activate English. I check that it is indeed English in the current thread. And then I use the sign up. I use ugettext to convert the static string. And since the English translation remains same, I get this. Then I activate simplified Chinese. I try to get language in order to ensure that it is indeed simplified Chinese set in the current context thread. And then what I do is, like, I request again the translated version, and then it gives me Chinese for sign up. I know this looks like a bit of a magic. We'll see where do we exactly set up all these static strings further in these slides. So many people have a question here, like, how do I decide which one to use, either the ugettext or the ugettext lazy version? That's indeed a great question, and use ugettext to immediately get the translated version of the text. For example, in your views.py file. So as soon as the request hits your Django backend, you should use ugettext to return a response. So use ugettext in where it is required to return a response immediately. Use ugettext lazy as a lazy object reference. It's a lazy object referencing the static string. So use it in your models.py files, like we did it to define the verbose name, right? So now that we have all the static data marked with the trans tag, ugettext, and ugettext lazy methods, it's time to generate the translation files and fill in the translations. So for generating the django.po files for simplified Chinese, we'll run the following inbuilt management command, which is makemessages. So it accepts a flag, which is -L, and then you say whichever language code you want to have static translation for. So you say, I want it in for simplified Chinese. So as soon as you run this management command, what happens in your project directory is, if you remember, we had already defined in settings the path for the locale folder. So inside the locale folder, all you get is this new folder defined, which was through makemessages command. Inside it, you'll find another directory, which is the LocaleMessages. And inside it, you'll get the django.po file. The PO file is the portable object format. It's used by the new ugettext library. So all the magic is because of the new ugettext library. Like all Django does is through that particular library. So we'll have a look at how the django.po file looks like. So it looks like this. And here the message ID is the text marked for translation. And the message str is its translated form. So you have to do this for all the languages you want to support in your Django app. And there will be separate django.po files for each of the language. Let's do one thing and fill it for simplified Chinese. So when I fill it for simplified Chinese, it looks like this. So what I say is, like, this is the message ID. Whenever someone references it through maybe ugettext or ugettext lazy methods, or even in trans or trans block tag, and the current locale is Chinese, then give this out. Simple as that. It's a kind of a function. You input something, you get an output. Here's gotcha 4. Use makemessages -i vn to exclude generating django.po files for every package in env. So what happened with me, like, I had my virtual environment defined inside my Django project. And as soon as I ran the makemessages command, what it did was it got inside every package that was included in the virtual environment and tried to generate django.po files for every other package. This shouldn't happen. And honestly, this isn't looking like a big deal, but we'll figure out how it can mess up. So gotcha 5. If you noticed correctly, in Django settings, we have mentioned the language code in all small letters, and it's separated by a hyphen. But when you do it with makemessages command, the language part, it is in small letters, and the country part is in capital letters, separated by an underscore rather than a hyphen. Now, if you make a mistake here, you won't see any error at all, and your translations won't work either. So since it was my first time with Chinese, I didn't even know like what's happening. I was kind of debugging this issue. Like first I tried zh-cn, then I tried zh_cn. I played it really well. And then I noticed there is a small caveat in the documentation which says, okay, you have to do this. So as soon as I did this, it all worked. So please take care. If you make a mistake here, it can leave you baffled and probably pulling out your hair. So the next step, once we have the django.po files in place, and then we have already defined all the static string translations, we compile those static string translations in order to be used by Django. We use another management command, which is compilemessages. So what it does is it generates another file, which is django.mo file. The mo object are the machine readable objects that Django can process and can pick up the translations from. So another gotcha. Compilemessages command would generate django.mo files for every package if your vn is in your project directory. So now it would really hurt you bad. Because what happened with me is, as soon as I ran this particular command, it tried to generate django.mo files for every package, and then I realized there were certain errors with packages. And I was wondering, okay, why is it failing? Why is it failing? And then I realized it's not my code, but it was some other library that was breaking up. Gotcha 7. After everything, make sure you restart your wsgi server. If you don't restart it, sorry, there won't be any translations available. So after doing all these steps, remember to always restart your wsgi server. This isn't you may not be able to find this when you're developing locally, but can be a problem on the server. So make sure you do it and probably include it in your deployment scripts. Now we're going to talk about dynamic string translations. So most of the data in our Django applications is dynamic and the user generated. So we can employ two approaches in order to support translations. First of all is enabling the end user to enter information in multiple languages. And the second one would be translating the dynamic text with the use of third-party libraries such as transifex. So what transifex does is you give them all the static data, all the dynamic data that is being fed in your Django applications, and they have these real translators out there who will convert that particular data and provide it to you, and then you can store it as you like. So we'll see the first approach in action, enabling the end user to enter information in multiple languages. So one of the approaches defining multiple columns corresponding to the language you're supporting. So if I say I have a column named first_name, so if my default locale is English, then I might have another column defined which says first name underscore zh underscore cn, which would actually store the first name in simplified Chinese. So the tricky part begins here. Let's say we are supporting two languages, Chinese and English here. There's a package known as Django Model Translation, which would do exactly the same as I described. So what it does is it will define different columns or attributes that are marked for translation. The code is really very similar to what you have ideally seen in while defining your admin pages. So it takes the class name, whatever it is. You'll define the fields here. Like I want more columns with the for first name and the last name, and you're done. Now, after you do this and you run migrations, it will dynamically attach all those fields. So you don't define those fields in your models.py, but you define them here. And this is how the SQL looks like. So first name is the default field that was defined on the model, which tends to store and retrieve the value of first name for the default language that is set in your Django app, which is English in this case. For each subsequent language that your Django project supports, a new field with the same name appears. So suffixed with the language code it is created, like first name underscore zh underscore cn for keeping the simplified Chinese version of the first name field. So now, what if you don't want to burden your users adding information in multiple languages? As we discussed, then the second approach comes into action. You can combine both the first and second approaches to ultimately support dynamic data. Second approach is using a third-party service such as transifex to convert all the incoming text in different languages. And since you all are still full of energy, here are bonus on debugging translation issues. So you can have the Django shell activated and then check if the translations are working with the help of the activate and the ugettext method already provided, like this. So you say, I am trying to activate the Chinese version, and I particularly looking for the static string translation for sign up. We have already seen it earlier. So this is quite helpful while debugging issues with translation. So some strings are still not translated. You have defined them in the django.po file, and then you have compiled messages. Some of these strings are translated, some of them are not. So if you go to the django.po file, you'll actually see that those particular strings should have been marked with the keyword fuzzy, with a comment fuzzy. So remove that line that marks them as fuzzy and then compile the messages again, and it should work again. So why does Django actually mark them as fuzzy? So if you have very slight variation in the Django.po files for the same static string, Django thinks that the translated version should change as well. So it marks them as fuzzy so that the translator may want to have a second look at it. So when you're sure that the translated version is correct, you can remove that line that marks them as fuzzy and compile the messages again, and it would work. So, conclusion. Django's translation support is indeed very powerful, but the initial setup becomes a lot of pain due to simple gotcha moments that can cause you a lot of headache and sometimes pulling out your hair, as I did. So the more early you support your project in different languages and write code correctly, the easier it will get in future to support multiple languages. Oh, do you know something now? You just became a multilingual superhero. You have the power to now support multiple languages in your app. So congrats. If you have any questions, you can reach me at email. I am also available at Code Mentor. On GitHub as Curious Learner, and you can ask me on Twitter. Thank you very much.
We got 3 minutes for questions.
Yeah, thanks for the great talk. Quick question. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on the transifex service that you mentioned a couple of times. I'm not familiar with it. Yeah, transifex.
Okay, so what you particularly do with transifex is you have a continuous stream of data which is input by the users in your app. So what you do is like you integrate their API where you throw all of the data that is coming, and then you implement a webhook which says that the translated version would be available there. So they have actual translators in place, actual human beings, which actually translate that particular data and then submit it. As soon as they submit it, it comes back to your given webhook, and then you can store it as you like. So for the first approach that we defined, like having different columns for the attributes, you can use that particular approach to actually integrate all the data that is coming in again.
Hi. Can you please explain what pitfalls should be avoided while defining URLs in the app URL and in the project URL file?
What do you mean by app URL and the project URL? Like
there are actually two URL files that you define. One is the main one, and the other one is that you can include in the main one.
Sorry, I didn't get it.
There are two files. One is the URL conf, which is the main file, and the other one that goes into your app. That sits right next to views and
okay,
forms.
that's okay. That's entirely okay. Like indeed, the local URLs are the local URL conf goes then again inside the root URL conf. So it doesn't make any difference as such. So for the APIs part, for the RESTful APIs part, I really prefer supplying the locale information in the request headers instead of defining in the URL itself. Some people do it, but like then it makes the URL somewhat clumsy. So I tried to avoid it. And for the admin panel pages, I prefer to have that information in the request itself, in the URL itself, because it's easier for people to actually make a GET request with, say, /en/admin. So I'm requesting the English version of the page, or say /zh -cn. So I'm requesting the Chinese URL of the page. Right.
Okay, we are out of time. Sorry.
So if anyone has any further questions for Sanyam, it is now